without contracting something mythical. But here comes the most exhausting part of Roman life: the social hierarchy. A brutal, finely tuned machine where every word, gesture and sandal strap placement could make or break you. Roman society is a ladder, but it's covered in oil and lined with daggers. At the top are the senators, old money, togas with purple stripes, and land ownership so vast it has its own postal code. Below them, the equestrians, the wealthy business class. Then come the plebeians like you, the struggling middle and lower classes. Below that, freedmen, slaves, foreigners, and the guy who accidentally insulted a statue of Augustus once. Want to move up? You'll need patrons, powerful individuals who protect you in exchange for lifelong loyalty, errands, favours, and the occasional vote. It's like having a boss, godfather, and landlord rolled into one charmingly condescending package. Each morning, you visit your patron's home as part of the salutatio. You wait in line with other clients, praise his haircut, maybe compliment his son's toga, then beg for a favour, usually money, food, or a recommendation. If you're lucky, he tosses you a coin and lets you carry his litter through the forum. Congratulations, you're now connected. Every move you make is watched and judged. Your clothes must be clean, not fashionable, just clean. Your speech must be proper. Your friends, carefully selected. And whatever you do, don't show ambition. That makes people nervous. If you rise too quickly, others will conspire to knock you back down, socially or literally. Networking is warfare. Gossip is currency. The wrong comment at a banquet can end your career. The right marriage can save your entire bloodline. But you better play it carefully. Love is for poets. The rest of Rome marries for alliances and estate access. And even if you climb high, don't get too comfortable. One bad harvest, one missed ritual, one jealous rival, and it's all over. You won't even hear the dagger coming. Now, the sun is setting. Surely things calm down at night, right? Not in Rome. The sun dips below the rooftops of Rome, and for a fleeting moment you think, maybe now, finally, you can rest. But nightfall in the Roman Empire isn't a time for peace. It's a shift in tone. From noisy and chaotic to dark and downright lethal. First, let's talk about lighting. There isn't any. Unless you're rich enough to burn oil lamps all night, and few are, most people rely on moonlight, memory, and blind hope to find their way through the labyrinthine alleys of the city. If you trip and fall, no one's helping. They might just take your shoes. The vigiles, Rome's official night watchmen, are supposed to patrol the streets, prevent fires, and stop crimes. In practice, they're overworked, underpaid, and often more interested in napping than heroics. Some are brave, most are bribable, and all of them are outnumbered. Criminals know this. Thieves, muggers, and the occasional bored ex-gladiator roam the shadows, looking for easy marks. If you're walking home alone, you're the easy mark. It doesn't matter who you are. Unless you're armed, fast, or invisible, you're at risk. And then there's fire, Rome's greatest nighttime terror. Insulae, those charming death trap apartments you sleep in, are made of wood and dreams. Cooking after dark is illegal for this reason, but laws mean little to a hungry tenant. A single overturned lamp can reduce an entire block to ash in hours. The Great Fire of 64 CE didn't start itself, but once it did, it raged like Mars in a bad mood. You might think your building is safe, until you smell smoke at midnight and realise there's no organised evacuation plan. You grab your one tunic, your chamber pot, and maybe your dignity, and sprint for your life down a collapsing staircase. And if it's not fire or thieves, it's noise. Drunken parties echo through the streets. Processions for obscure gods parade by with drums and shouting. And if a senator's mistress is upset, everyone within a 3-block radius knows. Sleep in ancient Rome is a luxury. Silence is a myth. And safety? That's reserved for the wealthy, the armed, and the extraordinarily lucky. But hey, morning's almost here. You just have to survive one more night. And then, repeat. The sun sets on Rome, and with it you might expect a moment of calm, a breeze, a quiet meal, maybe even sleep. Think again. Rome doesn't go silent at night. It simply shifts into something darker, louder, and more dangerous. The city never truly sleeps. It prowls. Let's start with fire. Roman buildings, especially the tall wooden insulae where the poor live, are tinderboxes waiting for a careless oil lamp or cooking fire to turn them into ash. There's no real fire department, just the vigiles, who are part firefighter, part night watch, part deeply underpaid janitor. They carry buckets and hope. If your apartment catches fire, you might be rescued, or you might become a cautionary tale in tomorrow's gossip. Then there are the thieves, cut purses and pickpockets who treat the moonlight like a hunting license. Rome's alleys are narrow and unlit. Torches are expensive. If you must walk after dark, you're doing so by feel, by instinct, and hopefully not by yourself. Don't carry anything shiny. Don't make eye contact. And whatever you do, don't get caught between two drunken gladiators arguing about someone's missing sandal. Speaking of drunk, the city's nightlife is booming. Taverns spill over with cheap wine, loud music, and men shouting bad poetry about Mars and women they'll never impress. Fights break out. Dice games end in blood. And sometimes an angry noble decides to settle a grudge by having a slave beat someone in the street. You hide in the shadows and pretend you didn't see anything. If you're a woman walking alone, good luck. Rome is not kind to unchaperoned females after dark. The streets belong to the desperate, the reckless, and the dangerously bored. Trying to sleep isn't much better. Your insula creaks like it's thinking about collapsing. Rats scurry through the walls. Your neighbour coughs like a dying goat. Somewhere nearby someone is screaming, either from passion, murder, or both. You press your face to a sweaty pillow and pray to Mercury for silence. But there is no silence in Rome. Not for you. Because in the Roman Empire, even the darkness is loud. And when dawn comes, you'll have to do it all again. You woke up in a crumbling insula, survived public toilets, chariot traffic, gladiator gore, lead poisoning, leeches, religious festivals, burning rooftops, and half-cooked lentils soaked in fermented fish sauce. You bowed to gods you don't understand, obeyed laws that don't protect you, and slept through riots, rats, and the occasional public decapitation. You're dirty, tired, possibly infected, and emotionally scarred by the communal sponge. And it's only been one day. Would you last another? Honestly, no, you wouldn't. Most modern humans, with our air conditioning, antibiotics, and 5-minute delivery windows, would crumble by lunchtime. You'd give up before the second round of garum. And yet, the Romans did it. For centuries. Because here's the maddening, magnificent thing. In the middle of all this filth, brutality, and noise, Rome worked. Somehow. They built cities, roads, aqueducts, libraries, temples, and amphitheatres. They expanded their empire across continents. They administered laws, developed philosophy, mapped the stars, performed surgeries, and invented concrete. Concrete. That stuff still holds up better than most modern buildings. They created systems that shaped Europe and beyond for 2,000 years. Latin became the root of half the languages you hear today. Their architecture inspired cathedrals, parliaments, and college campuses. Their political concepts, republics, senates, veto power, still echo through modern democracies. But it came at a cost. For the average Roman, not the emperors, not the marble-bathed elite, daily life was a hard-fought grind, and yet they endured. They adapted. They didn't have a choice. Because Rome wasn't made of gold. It was made of sweat, fear, ambition, and survival, layer by layer, person by person, century by bloody century. And that's why it lasted. You'd be begging to go back to modern plumbing and antihistamines by mid-afternoon, You'd trade your entire denarii pouch for a hot shower and a chair with a back on it, and that's okay. You don't need to survive ancient Rome. You just need to understand it. And maybe, just maybe, appreciate that someone, somewhere, once walked those same filthy streets and helped build the empire, so you could sit here today, clean, safe, and mildly horrified. Imagine being a Parthian princess in the 2nd century BCE. You've got royal blood in your veins, a name fit for legend, Rhodogoon, and more importantly, you live in a world where your family spends more time fighting rebels than hosting dinner parties. Rhodogoon wasn't born into peace and pearls. She was born into grit, horses, and the constant possibility that someone might poison your dates. Her father, Mithridates I, was no idle king. He was the one who expanded Parthia from a dusty fringe kingdom into a formidable empire that would one day spar with Rome. But expansion comes with problems, namely rebellions, betrayals, and those neighbours who just won't accept that your army now owns their backyard. As a young woman, Rhodogoon would have grown up watching envoys argue, commanders draw maps in the sand, and palace scribes trying to keep track of who was loyal this week. She wasn't trained just in silk and ceremony. She learned statecraft, command presence, and how to wear armour that didn't clash with her earrings. It's important to understand the role of Parthian women here. While not always given the spotlight, Parthian noblewomen were no strangers to power. Some ruled cities, others plotted dynastic alliances, and a few, like Rhodogoon, became legends not for who they married, but for who they defeated. And defeat she did, but that part comes later. At this point in her life, Rhodogoon's name was already known. She was a symbol, not just of royal lineage, but of Parthian pride. She carried with her the expectation that she'd either marry a king or become one in spirit. She didn't seem content with sitting on the sidelines while cities burned or provinces rebelled. While most royal ladies were being oiled and perfumed, Rhodogoon was likely brushing up on military reports and court logistics. She had no time for vanity, and as fate would have it, she would one day make a vow that involved not washing her hair until a rebellion was crushed. Spoiler alert, it took a while, but before we get to that dusty crown moment, we need to understand what kind of rebellion dares provoke a princess who would rather lead troops than wear gold. The Parthian Empire, grand as it appeared on a map, was more duct tape than marble. Stretching from the Persian Gulf to the edges of Mesopotamia and beyond, it was stitched together by marriages, oaths, and the occasional sword pressed firmly against someone's neck. So when a rebellion flared up in the western provinces, likely in Media or Babylonia, it wasn't exactly surprising. What was surprising was how bold the rebels were. These weren't just disgruntled tax evaders. These were full-blown aristocrats and city leaders, angry at the central power and perhaps emboldened by the young age or absence of a male royal enforcer. They didn't just throw a fit. They took fortresses, silenced Parthian envoys, and essentially told the crown to go polish its own sandals. Now, under ordinary circumstances, the king would have dispatched a general or a cousin with too much ambition and too little brains. But these weren't ordinary circumstances. For reasons still debated by historians, maybe timing, maybe logistics, maybe sheer royal defiance, Rhodogoon herself took command. And not just in the abstract, I'll approve the battle plans kind of way. No, she got on a horse, donned armour, and made a public vow that would become the stuff of legend. She would not wash, comb, or otherwise tend to her hair until the rebellion was crushed. It was bold. It was dramatic. It was, frankly, a nightmare for court stylists. But that vow, dramatic as it sounds, wasn't vanity. It was a declaration, a visual symbol that tied her personal dignity to the fate of the empire. Every time someone saw her tangled, dust-laden hair, they'd be reminded, this isn't over until we win. And that worked. Soldiers rallied. The troops didn't just see a princess. They saw a commander who was literally letting her beauty decay with the war. She embodied Parthian resilience, the kind that didn't rely on thrones but on thorns, dust, and sweat. Meanwhile, the rebels probably didn't know whether to laugh or panic. They had expected a general, maybe a diplomat. Instead, they got a furious, unwashed woman who was riding straight for their gates with steel in her eyes and no time for conditioner. And worse, she meant business. When Rhodogun set out from the capital, she wasn't escorted by a lavish court parade or showered in rose petals. She was accompanied by cavalry, grit, and the weight of an empire that needed its rebels squashed like an overripe fig. And she looked the part. Gone were any signs of courtly delicacy. Her hair, famously unkempt, began to take on a life of its own, hanging like a banner of war-torn determination. In a world obsessed with appearances, she turned her own into a weapon. The campaign was not swift. This wasn't a single siege, easily resolved with a bribe and a battering ram. The rebel cities were fortified and confident. They had expected hesitation from the central power, not a battle-hardened woman galloping through the dust with fire in her gaze. But Rhodogun didn't waver. Her military instincts were sharp, perhaps sharper than many of the men who had led before her. She employed classic Parthian strategies, mobility, feigned retreats, and hit-and-run raids. Her forces would appear at the edge of a rebel-held city, vanish like smoke, and return a day later from an unexpected flank. Reports suggest her soldiers admired her not just as a symbol, but as a tactician. She didn't ride behind the lines. She was up front, dirt under her nails and fury under her helmet. And as the weeks dragged on, so did her hair. It said that by the third month, the strands had begun to knot into ropes, full of dust and sweat, and the whispers of battlefield prayers. But that only made her more terrifying to her enemies, and more revered by her men. Rebels called her the Witch Queen, not because she practiced magic, but because no noblewoman should still be fighting in the field and refusing a bath. Surely, they reasoned, something unnatural was at work. But there was nothing magical about it, just sheer, unrelenting discipline. By the time her army laid siege to the final rebel holdout, the legend had grown faster than the rebellion had. In taverns and tents alike, soldiers joked that the enemy wasn't afraid of Parthian swords. They were afraid Rhodogun would never wash again. And truth be told, they weren't entirely wrong. The last stronghold of the rebellion loomed ahead, a walled city rumoured to be impenetrable, where the rebel leaders had dug in like ticks on a dog. Supplies had been hoarded, archers lined the parapets, and the gates had been reinforced with the kind of smug confidence only traitors possess. They believed they could outlast Rhodogun. Big mistake. By now her appearance was legend. Word had spread not just through the empire, but into enemy territory. The woman who won't wash, they whispered, has arrived. Some said her hair had turned to iron. Others claimed she hadn't slept in weeks. The myths piled up like siege ladders. But Rhodogun was no myth. She was real, and she had tactics. Instead of launching a reckless assault, she opted for a slow, punishing siege, cut off trade routes, intercept messengers, poison wells. The rebels had braced for a battle of swords. Instead, they got starvation. She weaponized time itself, letting her enemies rot from the inside out. And all the while, she camped outside the city with her soldiers, just another commander beneath the canvas tents. She shared their meals, gritty bread and lukewarm wine. She inspected their armour. She led patrols. And she still, despite every opportunity, refused to so much as touch a comb. For her soldiers, the vow had become sacred. No one dared suggest she break it, even in jest. It had become a living embodiment of Parthian pride, a symbol that their suffering wasn't for nothing. Every tangled strand was a reminder. We are still in this fight. Inside the rebel city, morale crumbled. They had expected to demoralize the enemy by holding out. Instead, it was they who began to wither. Their own commanders began to argue. Food ran low. Rumours of desertion began to ripple like cracks through stone. And then came the breaking point. A small gate, left unguarded for just an hour, perhaps out of fatigue, perhaps sabotage, was found by one of Rhodogun's scouts. That night, under the cover of darkness and wind, her forces slipped in and opened the main gates from within. By morning, the city was hers, and Rhodogun, face streaked with sweat and ash, stood atop the battlements, unbathed, victorious, and utterly terrifying. Victory was not declared with trumpets or parades, it was declared with water. After months of dust, battle, and relentless pursuit, Rhodogun stood before her army not in royal robes, but in the same battlefield garb she had worn since the campaign began. Her armour bore dents from rebel blades, her face was lined from sun and strain, and her hair, her wild, matted, filthy hair, now hung down her back like a lion's mane made of wire and legend. But she had done it. Every rebel city had fallen. Every oath-breaker had been brought low, and now, with her vow complete, she could finally do what no one in the Empire had dared attempt to rush. She could wash her hair. According to tradition, and later accounts passed down through oral history, Rhodogun summoned her servants not to a golden chamber, but to a public courtyard. She wanted her soldiers, the ones who bled beside her, to witness this moment. Basins were filled, oils were warmed, combs were retrieved from storage like sacred relics. And then, under the open sky, the warrior princess of Parthia, caked in the grime of war, began to scrub away months of rebellion. It was symbolic. Every tangle undone was another city reclaimed. Every rinse of water over her scalp washed away defiance, soaked into the earth as if the land itself had been restored. Some say she wept. Others say she laughed. But what no one disputed was the silence among the troops as they watched. Hardened men, scarred and sunburned, stood like statues as Rhodogun emerged from her ritual transformed. No crown was placed on her head. She didn't need one. The dust had become her diadem. The act of not washing had become more powerful than any jewel. And in that moment, Parthia didn't just have a princess. It had a symbol. She could have returned to court in triumph, let the scribes compose flattering odes, allowed nobles to fall over themselves in praise. But she didn't rush back to luxury. She stayed with her troops a while longer. She dined with them. She listened to them. She knew that her legend had just begun, but she didn't want it forged in gold. She wanted it forged in memory. After the hair-washing that became an event for the ages, Rhodogun could have ridden straight to the capital with fanfare, banners, and enough propaganda to last a century. But she didn't. Instead, she took the long route back, deliberately visiting the cities she had reclaimed one by one, walking their streets, inspecting their defences, and ensuring no embers of rebellion still glowed beneath the ashes. This wasn't mere ceremony. It was strategy. Rhodogun knew the danger of victory, how quickly it can melt into complacency. Empires don't fall from defeat alone. They fall from forgetting why they fought in the first place. She wanted the rebels and loyalists alike to understand that Parthian strength wasn't just cavalry and coin. It was embodied in her very presence, a woman who chose hardship over comfort and earned loyalty by example, not decree. And loyalty she received. Everywhere she went, people gathered not to gawk at royalty, but to stare in awe at her. Not polished, not perfumed, but real. She didn't bring fear. She brought accountability. She asked for reports, heard complaints, paid for supplies out of her own war coffers. She rewarded cities that had stayed loyal and offered clemency, carefully, cautiously, to those who repented. By the time she reached the royal court, her return had already become a legend. Scribes rushed to record her tale. Artists argued over how to capture her, wild-haired and battle-worn or radiant and reborn. Ministers whispered about the implications. A woman commanding armies, keeping oaths, and now standing at the heart of Parthian power with the loyalty of half the provinces in her hand. And here was the dilemma. What do you do with a princess who is more popular than most kings? Some urged she be married off, as if that would contain her influence. Others wanted her placed in charge of border defences permanently. But Rhodogun didn't seem concerned with titles or politics. She had proven what she needed to. The battlefield had been her throne. the dust, her crown. And her name, already etched in the hearts of soldiers and citizens alike, needed no royal inscription to endure. She didn't need a coronation. She had already been crowned, not with gold, but with history. In the months following her campaign, Rhodagoon didn't seek the limelight, but it followed her anyway. She became a subject of poetry, sculpture, gossip, and awe, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. Every soldier who'd fought under her command returned with a tale, and every tale made her larger, more enduring, more untouchable. Yet in the palace halls of Parthia, where politics slithered like snakes behind silk curtains, her silence was unnerving. She didn't boast, she didn't lobby, she didn't ask for titles or lands. Instead, she observed, listened, and understood the real battlefield had only shifted from stone walls to whispered conversations. Even the king, her father or possibly her brother depending on the exact moment in the tangled Parthian dynastic timeline, had to tread carefully. Rhodagoon wasn't just popular. She was respected in a way few men at court could compete with. Not adored for beauty or bloodline, but for leadership, for command. She had turned her vow into policy, her filth into folklore. And yet, the silence she kept was as deliberate as any military maneuver. She didn't tell others what she planned next, because perhaps even she didn't know. For the first time in years she wasn't fighting. She wasn't commanding troops or outwitting rebels. She was still, and that stillness unnerved many. What does a woman who conquered without a crown do next? One theory among historians is that Rhodagoon used this silence as leverage. Her presence alone, her every quiet nod or glance, forced decisions. Officials hesitated to propose bad policy for fear she'd frown. Generals delayed campaigns, hoping she might weigh in. Her silence wasn't passive. It was a tool. She had discovered that not speaking could be more powerful than speaking. And so she remained, a living legend walking the palace corridors, her freshly washed hair braided not just in gold thread but in memory. Her very existence challenged the norms. She had proven that Parthian might wasn't confined to masculine hands. It could ride into battle with tangled hair and return with cities at its feet, and all she had to do now was wait. Because sometimes the greatest move is no move at all. As the years passed, Rhodagoon's name slowly faded from the formal records. Parthian scribes, more eager to elevate kings and dynasties than unruly warrior princesses, began to downplay her campaign. The silence she once used as a weapon now became the excuse for erasure. No grand mausoleum was raised in her name. No epic poem commissioned by the state bore her face on golden scrolls. But that's the thing about true legend. It doesn't need permission to survive. In the outposts where her army had marched, in the villages she spared, her name remained a whispered spell. Mothers told stories of her to their daughters, not as a fairy tale, but as a warning to any man who underestimated a woman with a mission. Soldiers recited her tactics as if they were sacred text. And rebels, well, even decades later, they still spoke of her as if she might ride again from the dust, with hair flying like war banners. There's something profoundly unsettling about someone who breaks every rule of their time and still wins. Rhodagoon wasn't content to be decoration in a court. She didn't play the flute, paint birds, or practice the refined art of being quietly ignored. She burned through her time like a comet, and then vanished just as quickly. Historians have debated what became of her. Some believe she retired from public life, choosing peace over politics. Others think she remained an advisor in the shadows, shaping Parthian strategy from behind the veil of anonymity. A few romantics claim she rode out one final time to settle a border dispute and disappeared into legend. Never confirmed, never denied, but what's certain is this. Her legacy endured where it mattered most, in the people. She may not have worn the crown, but she ruled in ways no diadem ever could. She redefined what loyalty meant. She showed that a vow, Even one as strange as refusing to comb your hair could be as binding as a royal decree, and far more inspiring. And though history books may offer her only a footnote, the dust of Parthia still remembers her, because you don't need a marble statue to be eternal. You just need to keep your vow and win. Centuries after her death, Rhodogune's story remains a paradox, well known in whispers, yet elusive in ink. No towering statue bears her likeness, no royal tomb sings her praises in carved stone. But in the collective memory of those who admire rebellion, endurance and principled ferocity, she is immortal. Not in the way kings are remembered, but in the way forces of nature are. She didn't need to conquer foreign lands or sign monumental treaties. What she conquered was expectation. In a world where women were told to wait behind curtains while men spilled blood in their name, Rhodogune tore the curtain down and marched out barefoot, helmet in hand. She didn't ask for command. She took it. And the empire didn't collapse. It followed. More importantly, she taught her people a lesson that no decree could enforce, that loyalty doesn't come from fear. It comes from seeing your leader suffer beside you, from watching them choose discipline over comfort, from watching them keep a vow longer than anyone thought possible. She wasn't perfect. No legend is. But her story endures precisely because it wasn't polished or clean. It was tangled, muddy, honest, like her hair on that final day of victory. In that filth was dignity. In that vow was a vision of leadership stronger than any title. When her soldiers looked at her, they didn't see a princess. They saw someone who believed in the fight more than her own vanity. And that's the part history couldn't quite erase. Even now, long after Parthia has crumbled and its cities turned to sand, her name returns in moments of resistance. Artists revive her. Writers search for her footprints. A vow not to wash until victory. It sounds absurd to some, but to those who've had to claw their way through injustice, it makes perfect sense. Rhodogune was never about glamour. She was about grit. And in the end, it was the dust that crowned her, not gold. Dust. The same substance emperors try to escape in death, yet the very thing she wore like a badge of honour. She was forgotten by kings, ignored by chroniclers, but remembered by the dust. And that's where legends truly live, not in stone, but in soil. Before empires clashed and blood soaked the sand, before kings trembled at her name, Tomyris was simply a daughter of the wind, born to the raw, open steppe. The land she came from was not gilded in marble or echoing with philosophy. It was brutal, free, and endlessly vast. This was the world of the Massagetae, fierce nomadic horse archers who rode like spirits of the plains, their lives shaped by survival, honour, and war. We know little of Tomyris's childhood, but we can imagine the rhythm of it. She would have learned to ride before she could run, to shoot before she could speak in full sentences. Among the Massagetae, girls were not caged in tents or veiled by silence. They trained beside the boys, rode with the warriors, and grew up with iron in their blood. To lead, one had to bleed. And Tomyris, even as a young woman, bled for her people. Her tribe worshipped the sun and sky, lived off their herds, and buried their dead with weapons, ready for battle in the afterlife. They had no cities, no golden temples, but they had pride. And when enemies approached, they met them not with prayers, but with arrows. Tomyris likely came to power after the death of her husband, who may have ruled the tribe before her. But what's certain is that when the moment came, she didn't inherit leadership. She seized it. In a time when most women were considered property, Tomyris commanded an army. She negotiated with kings. She dared to speak as an equal. And if they didn't listen, she made them. She was more than a queen. She was Shahmat, the steppe's checkmate, a war chief in bronze and leather who would soon face the greatest empire on earth. But power, especially for a woman, never comes without consequence. As Tomyris began to solidify her rule, whispers grew louder. Across the mountains to the south, A king was watching. His name was Cyrus the Great, and he wanted more. The stage was set. The steppe wind howled, and Tomyris, daughter of warriors,